My name's Matthew Harding, and I'm the Dean of the Melbourne Law School. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today to launch the annual Flos Greig Lecture in Law. Now, of course, we're meeting today on Wurundjeri country, and I'm very grateful to Wurundjeri Elder Uncle Tony Garvey. He's generously agreed to join us today and welcome us to his country. Over to you, Uncle Tony. Thank you very much, Uncle Tony. I know how busy you are, so we really appreciate you coming along today. And can I just take the opportunity to acknowledge the ongoing connection with country that all Indigenous Australians enjoy, and also acknowledge the facts of dispossession and profound injustice that we as a nation continue to deal with. The Melbourne Law School is delighted to host this event today, establishing the annual Flos Greig Public Lecture in Law. The lecture's founded in celebration of Flos Greig, a University of Melbourne alumna who was the first woman to graduate with a Bachelor of Laws degree in Victoria in 1903. Flos Greig commenced her studies in law when Australian women did not have the right to vote or stand for Parliament, and with no certainty that she would be admitted to practice law upon her graduation. Flos Greig and her supporters began a campaign to allow women to enter the legal profession, and she was finally admitted to practice as the first female barrister and solicitor in Australia on the 1st of August 1905. Establishing this annual lecture recognises Flos Greig's pioneering and reformist spirit, which transformed the basis of admission to the Australian legal profession. The Melbourne Law School intends to continue this legacy by each year inviting an accomplished woman in the law to present this lecture. We're so pleased to have your company today as we launch the very first in what will hopefully be a significant event in our annual calendar. In order to secure the future success of this lecture, our ambition is to raise $250,000 over the next 5 years to support the lecture into the future. A few words of thanks now. We're deeply grateful to Cornwalls, and in particular to Sophie Filipponi and to Bianca Quinn for their partnership and for their generous support in helping today's event come to life. Thank you. Thank you to members of Flos Greig's family who are here today in order to celebrate this special occasion with us. And on your tables you'll see that there's a volume written, I understand, by Flos Greig's great niece and celebrating her life. So I hope you enjoy the book. Can I extend also a warm welcome and special thanks to my predecessor as Dean of the Melbourne Law School, Professor Pip Nicholson, who's now the university's Deputy Vice-Chancellor for People and Community. Pip was the moving spirit behind this lecture, and it's great to have her here today. After the Lord Mayor's address, Pip's going to kindly moderate a question and answer session and offer the formal vote of thanks. Welcome, Pip. And of course, can I offer sincere thanks to all those who have made a generous contribution towards the Flos Greig Lecture Fund. If you are interested in making a gift to support this lecture, there is some information on your table, or you can find one of our staff to talk to. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Bianca Quinn, partner at Cornwalls law firm. Bianca is a University of Melbourne alumna and a former convener of Victorian women lawyers. She's involved in a number of professional bodies that seek to influence and shape discourse in respect of gender diversity in the legal profession. One of Bianca's current passions is the Cornwalls Flos program, which she was instrumental in setting up within the firm. And I believe Bianca might say something about that program in a minute. Please join me in welcoming Bianca, who will introduce our distinguished speaker, the Lord Mayor. Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you, Matthew, for those kind words of welcome, and Uncle Tony, thank you for welcoming us to your country today. On behalf of Cornwalls, I'd like very much to welcome you to the University of Melbourne's inaugural Flos Greig lecture, presented by the Melbourne Law School. As a partner at Cornwalls and a fellow University of Melbourne alumni, I'm so proud that Cornwalls has committed to sponsoring this event for the next 5 years. I'd like to begin by acknowledging Peter McMullen, AM, who has a long association with Cornwalls as well as the University of Melbourne. For the past 14 years, Peter has been in the role of Special Counsel at Cornwalls and has facilitated many meaningful connections for the firm. His contribution to both Cornwalls and the university is outstanding. Peter supported the establishment of the world's first academic centre dedicated to the issue of statelessness at the Melbourne University Law School, which is known as the Peter McMullen Centre of Statelessness. As an active philanthropist, Peter always seeks to collaborate with other individuals and organisations to maximise the impact of those contributions. Our association with Peter humbles us, and we recognise his integral role in addressing pressing social issues. I'd also like to acknowledge how grateful we are to Robin Campbell, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. She was responsible for the introduction of our COO, Sophie Filipponi, to Professor Pip Nicholson, who, as Matthew mentioned, was instrumental in bringing this all together. So if you can please join me in thanking Peter, Robin and Pip. Cornwalls has a long and special association with Flos Greig, who was the first woman to be admitted to practice law in Australia. At Cornwalls, we continue to honour her legacy through our Flos program. Our National Committee works to provide opportunities for women in the law and to champion our gender diverse and inclusive workspace. Back in January 2020, we were lucky enough to be contacted by Flos's great niece, Iola Matthews, regarding a book she was writing about her great aunt. Having seen that Flos Greig was a Cornwalls alumni, Iola met with myself and Sophie, but unfortunately the COVID pandemic hit, so things were put on hold for a bit. We were able to stay in touch, but it did give Iola a bit of time to write her book, and as Matthew mentioned, everybody here has a copy. Cornwalls was proud to sponsor the publishing of the book, and in it you can find some further information about our program, as well as some details to direct your friends and family to purchase the book if you wish to do so. I'd like to extend a very special welcome to Iola, who's in the room today, as well as her family members and other descendants of Flos Greig. It's an honour to have you here for this special occasion. It's now my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp. The Lord Mayor began her career as a solicitor, completing a Bachelor of Laws with honours concurrently with a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Melbourne. She stayed in law for a decade before joining the business world, holding senior roles at both KPMG and ANZ. Sally is most well known for her current position as Lord Mayor of Melbourne, being re-elected in 2020 after becoming the first woman to be directly elected as Lord Mayor in May 2018. She's no stranger to being a first. She was the first woman to hold the post of Agent General for Victoria in the United Kingdom, Europe and Israel, and even made history in 2004 when, as a passionate Pies supporter, she became the first female board member of the Collingwood Football Club. Good luck on Sunday, Sally. I'm a Bulldog supporter, so I hope that you do the Blues, so that would be good. In addition to her responsibilities as Lord Mayor, she's involved in a number of charities, currently sitting on the board of the Olivia Newton-John Cancer Research Institute, the Mary Jane Lewis Scholarship Foundation, and the Melbourne University's own Melbourne Foundation for Business and Economics. Lord Mayor, we're honoured to have you here today for the inaugural Flos Greig public lecture, and I'm delighted now to hand you over to Sally.
Thank you, Bianca. What a lovely, warm welcome, and it really is an honour to be here for the inaugural Flos Greig lecture, now that it is firmly within the heart of the family at the University of Melbourne. I can't see Uncle Tony still here, but he did a great job. I love Welcome to Countries that include so much information that help educate us on this incredible culture that I think we are finally embracing more generously and appropriately as we go forward. And on behalf of the City of Melbourne, I acknowledge our traditional owners of the land that we're gathered on today, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung, and pay respects to elders past and present. And at the City of Melbourne, as part of our reconciliation, we acknowledge and honour the unbroken spiritual, cultural and political connection that our Indigenous owners have with this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. It is so lovely to be here today. Thank you for coming together. FTF, I just learnt that, face to face. We love these acronyms, and it's really lovely for me to be here at the glorious State Library and to see so many old mates as well. It is really important that we have events like this through organisations like the Law School, because it means we meet new friends and colleagues and we get a chance to see old ones as well. I was at law school with Jane Hyder, who's here. I've done some fantastic projects over the years with Kate Tawney and Peter McMullen. And of course, it's been brilliant to see Pip Nicholson rise through the ranks of the University of Melbourne, now being a Deputy Vice-Chancellor. But she's also been a school mum and a neighbour of mine as well. So it's lovely to see Pip. But that is the importance, Sonia, many roles together, of really coming back together face to face. And thank you for the opportunity, Matthew, to do that. Well, I'm here. It's an amazing title, and I want to acknowledge Zoe Daniels, who's here on table 10 from my team at the City of Melbourne. Is an incredible researcher, writes beautiful pieces for me to present, and I put a few flourishes on, but Zoe, thank you for this lovely speech today. We are gathering, of course, for the annual Flos Greig lecture. I haven't even started yet, but I want to say what a thrill to be here with Flos's family. What a legacy, and I'm sure you continue it in lots of different ways, but those fingerprints really have had amazing reverberations and really personally inspiring, so it's lovely to see you. Well, it is an interesting time for this topic because we've just gone through one of the more fascinating federal elections in my lifetime, and of course we have in 98 days a state election ahead of us. And many headlines have called the last federal election the women's election, given that it was one decided with so many women's voices and saw an extraordinary number of women really come to the fore. Very exciting from my perspective. And really it signals that more and more people are demanding that the representation in parliaments at 3 levels of government is representation that reflects them. And this is incredibly important. Of course, we also need then more and more people, and particularly women, to step up and be willing to represent, which is a central theme for me today. The great thing about, well, one of the great things, because it's such a great role, I highly recommend it to you all, of being Lord Mayor, is that I get to meet so many fascinating people and hear so many brilliant stories. And it's these stories that I feel a personal responsibility to continue to share, because that's how legends and role models are created, through the sharing of these stories, which is another central theme for today. But the saying goes, you can't be what you can't see. And from a gender perspective, it's absolutely critical that the stories of women are told over and over again. So in my role as Lord Mayor in my first year, actually my first International Women's Day as Lord Mayor, I made a pledge to share more women's stories in my speeches and to use more women as people that I quote in my speeches as a way of really adding to this momentum around women and their stories. I think that sharing stories really about women really adds to their journeys, adds value to their journeys, but their successes are about guiding future generations, and that's exactly what Flos's story has done, and I can't wait to get home and read that book in detail. So a wonderful example. Let's start with Flos now. Matthew, I know you've taken just about every part of my Flos story, but it is hard to believe that when she worked into her first law lecture, With all of the usual first day nerves and concerns of the unknowns, she faced a future where it was not possible for her to practice what she was studying. Just to think that you were taking on that barrier on your first day of study is truly extraordinary. Fast forward to today, and the great news is being a female lawyer is sort of unremarkable, and I say that in a very positive way because we want more of that. In fact, 53% of solicitors in Australia are female, which is brilliant. The number of female law graduates have outnumbered male counterparts since 1993. And as if tertiary study as a female in the 1900s didn't come with enough trials, Flos also challenged the system, as Matthew pointed out, paving the way for every Australian woman who has walked into a law lecture to be able to also walk into a court and represent clients. Now, when I started thinking about the rise of female voices in politics and leadership, I found that it's certainly not a new phenomenon, and that's good. Melbourne has been leading the charge for more than a century, so I'm going to share some stories. The first one is Vita Goldstein, which hopefully some of you know Vita's story. I think Vita's name has become better known since Zoe Daniels' victory in the last election for that seat of Goldstein. I met with Zoe last week actually, and she has absolutely hit the ground running, and I think she's really fulfilling a lot of Vita's energy and dedication. So it was in 1902, 3 years before Flos was going to be admitted to the Victorian bar, that a revolution was afoot here in Australia, and particularly with a central focus on Melbourne and Victoria. Australia made international headlines at the time, becoming the second nation in the world to legalise votes for women, but the first nation to also allow women to stand as a representative to be elected into Parliament. Quite extraordinary. And it was Vita Goldstein, an amazing Melburnian, who was the driving force behind those hard-fought changes. A feminist, a suffragette, Vita was revered internationally as the leader of the Votes for Women movement, and she was invited to the Oval Office by Teddy Roosevelt, who wanted to see what an enfranchised woman looked like. When she did come home, I heard he was very impressed. When she did come home, she was amongst the first 4 women to stand for federal parliament here in Australia. She lost, and she tried 4 more times, paving the way for people like Enid Lyons and Dorothy Tangnay to become the first women representatives in Australian Parliament in 1943. Vita ran for election 4 times without success. I would say what seemed like a failure for Vita actually contained many wins, because with every single campaign, Vita took the opportunity to fire up the national conversation and debates about wage equality, about the right for women to be safe and free from violence in their homes, about women's rights in general in the workplace and society, and about women's responsibilities to step up into political arenas. She did this so brilliantly. But what's shocking is that those issues are still at the top of our agendas today. 100 years on, we are still having exactly the same discussions. Either Vita was way ahead of her time, or we are taking far too long to create substantial change. Earlier, you may have picked up that I said there were many women who were granted the right to vote and run for Parliament in 1902, but not all. It's an important distinction because this right was not extended to Aboriginal people. In celebrating women and women's achievements, we cannot forget that for Aboriginal people here in Australia, regardless of their gender, they were not entitled to vote in federal elections until 1962, and they were not recognised as citizens of this nation until 1967. It's shocking, and we need to keep reminding ourselves because that was only just over 60 years ago. Aboriginal people have faced systematic disadvantage on a crushing scale across this country, and it makes their leaders and their trailblazers even more remarkable. And again, I thank Tony for being here today. Now, can I just find, with a show of hands, how many people have heard of Lady Gladys Nichols? Just a handful. Well done. Well, you may have encountered her statue with her husband in Parliament Gardens on Spring Street. If you haven't, go and have a look next time you're in that area. Lady Gladys Nichols was one of our earliest Aboriginal activists, an extraordinary woman. She dedicated her life to advancing Aboriginal rights and in particular those of Aboriginal women. In 1939, Lady Gladys joined a mass walk-off at the Aboriginal Mission, which was her home in New South Wales, in protest against the harsh conditions and poor treatment of residents. From there, she made her way to Melbourne, where she continued to work for other Aboriginal women to fight for equality and better outcomes across the Aboriginal community. It became very, very personal for Lady Gladys, and her home was known to have an open door policy for young Aboriginal women who needed support and help and who'd come to the city in search of work. She established and funded the first Indigenous girls' hostel in Melbourne, and she was also fundamental in establishing the Women's Auxiliary of the Aboriginal Advancement League. Truly outstanding. And when her husband became the Governor of South Australia in 1977, Lady Gladys continued to use her platform to promote Indigenous rights, and she did so fiercely until her death in 1988. Well, Flos, Vita and Lady Gladys, they are three incredible stories out of many women who have helped shape Melbourne, Victoria and Australia as we know it today. And their trailblazing efforts led to more trailblazers, and this is the point. People like Linda Dessau, who's the first female Governor of Victoria and the youngest University of Melbourne Law graduate. The Honourable Julia Gillard, who of course became the first female Prime Minister of Australia and a fellow Melbourne Law School alumni. And the Honourable Joan Kerner, the first female Premier of Victoria, just to name a few. One of my first impressions on my first day as Lord Mayor was taken from the gargantuan portraits of Victorian, stern-looking Victorian gentlemen that adorn the walls of the civic rooms at Town Hall, all of whom had acted previously as Lord Mayor. The head count is very telling when you look at the marble tables in Town Hall that show in gold letters that out of 104 Lord Mayors of Melbourne, 101 are men. 3 are women, including me. And I'm actually ashamed to admit that when I became Lord Mayor, I'd never heard of the first 2 female Lord Mayors, Lecky Ord and Winsome McCackey, who acted in 1987 and 1988. I don't know why I didn't know their names. I don't know why I didn't know their stories, but I suspect it's because nobody was sharing them and that their achievements are not highlighted. And this is what we need to change. Because their vision and leadership really shaped Melbourne at a time when we were described as a moribund city in a rust bucket state in the early 90s. Their efforts were part of the transformation of Melbourne then into one of the most livable cities in the world, and they played a key leadership role, and yet so much of their legacy is invisible. I called them straight away, and they came straight away to catch up with me, have lunch with me, give me advice, and share that history, which has very much enriched the way I go about my leadership, and I'm so grateful. Last Sunday, I went to the MCG for Peggy O'Neill's last home and away function as the first female president of an AFL football club. Incredible. Peggy's CV has been a symbol for equality here in Melbourne, Victoria and Australia. I'll keep saying it, and for those of you who don't know Peggy very well, she has applied her background and skills in law to all sorts of sectors, but particularly equality in sport, gender equality in superannuation, and then applying that also to housing. When she started in 2013, Peggy was the first woman to be president of a club, as I said, but then that paved the way for Kate Roffey at Melbourne, for Kylie Watson-Wheeler at the Western Bulldogs, and to Sonia Hood at the Kangaroos. Wonderful momentum. Started with the first and it has continued. In an interview this week, because she's doing a lot of media at this time, Peggy said, "When you're the only woman in the room, you're all the women in the world." It's a lot of responsibility. And I love it when I see female leaders take that responsibility with gusto and excitement and a sense of what they can create for the women that come after them, which Peggy has certainly done. Now, I am one of those feral Collingwood supporters, Bianca, thank you, and you probably wouldn't want to sit next to me in the stands. And like some of our other trailblazers, I was lucky enough to be brought up in a family and in a school environment that empowered women to question things and to have a go. Thank goodness. I played football in primary school. And whilst my career towards a Brownlow medal was not to be, I did become passionate about the roles that women can play in the AFL. Just loved the game and wanted to be involved. So in 2003, after many years of collecting expertise as a lawyer and then running my own business, I learnt that the club was looking for a new director, so I put my hand up. It often just starts with that, putting your hand up. At the time, I was the only woman to have applied for a role on the Collingwood board, and I felt very daunted but also excited. And I pushed through that selection process and ultimately became the first director of the Collingwood Football Club. It was an amazing time. It was a dream come true. I'd like to say for me, it was really my dad. But as I said, it was a thrill. And I wondered at that time, what if I'd been deterred by the fact that no woman had gone before me? What if I hadn't grown up in a family that encouraged me to have a go? And I understand that those elements in themselves can be incredible barriers to women putting themselves forward for these roles. And I'll just say again, it's why it's so important that we continue to celebrate the trailblazers that have gone before us and that can show that it can be done. Now, I didn't have Lord Mayor on my career list, and I acknowledge that they're quite extraordinary circumstances when I did put my hand up to become Lord Mayor. But it was a crystal clear thought in my mind that instead of sitting on the sidelines and complaining, it was time for me to be part of the change. And that's what motivated me to put my hand up to become Lord Mayor in 2018. It was the most stressful experience in my career. I have so many war stories to tell you. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If you're a Monty Python fan, if they were just flesh wounds. But of course, since then, we've gone through COVID. And nothing compares to the experiences we've all gone through in this incredible disruption in our lives. Nonetheless, I am a serial have-a-goer and I absolutely love taking risks. And I know that that is a personal element and characteristic and attribute that drives me, but it is something that I try to encourage in lots of other women around me. Because I know that there was value in the running for Lord Mayor. I knew that there was value in the experience, that there were things I would find out about myself and about others, about institutions and structures and processes, and that in itself was worth it. And the most powerful thing for me during that experience was to really channel Vita and to know that just being in the debates and the discussions about the issues that were important to Melbourne made it worthwhile, even if I was going to lose. I worried about that a lot. Stories like mine and like Peggy's are important, and representation in leadership matters. In fact, it is the hot topic of the moment. As I said earlier, we saw in the federal election a record number of women elected to Australian Parliament. Women like Monique Ryan and Allegra Spender and Zoe Daniel and Zali Steggall have fought their way into these roles by challenging policy and ensuring that Australians like them felt heard and could be represented. And it's not just politicians that are fighting for policy reform either at the moment. We're seeing this in so many ways. I did give another cheer this week for Grace Tame, former Australian of the Year, who has influenced the review of our sexual assault and consent laws. Yay. We need more women to inspire change and to keep snowballing our nation's progress, and that means we need more women to step up, to put their hand up and to represent. Now, another aspect of representation and inspiration came back to me when we've been considering more recently how we tell women's stories around town. Vita Goldstein passed away in 1949 and has no fitting tribute in this city of Melbourne to her efforts and the change that she created. In 1980s, the electorate was named after her, but I would say not many people really understood the background to that name change. Lady Gladys has a statue. Of course, she appears arm in arm alongside her husband, which is fantastic that even that happened at the time. We've got Amphlett Lane for Chrissy Amphlett. We've also got Madam Brussels Lane, named after a small business owner who ran a very popular business for men at the top end of town. But where is Flos? Where is Vita? And where are the other women who have shaped Melbourne over the years? So we've done a head count of statues, monuments and memorials, and there are 54 devoted to men and there are 9 to women. A real imbalance and something that we need to do more about. But some of you might be saying, well, why are you so focused on statues? Aren't they a bit old-fashioned? Don't they collect dust and worse, with birds perched on shoulders, etc.? But statues and monuments and plaques and pictures in public spaces are important because storytelling is important and they provoke storytelling. Social research and historians have also looked into this and they tell us that visual representations of leaders and trailblazers influence the collective psyche of our community, and that's what we're trying to do. So in simple terms, statues are storytelling devices, very effective storytelling devices, and they single out the people and the events that are important to us as a community, that are worth knowing about our history as a community and as a city. And they signify automatically authority, respect, reverence, credibility, importance and gravitas. And that's exactly what women of this city deserve. We've talked about inspiring leaders and the revolution they've fought for, and we cannot sit idly by and romanticise that progress. We've just been talking about this over lunch, actually. We must keep making space for, voting for and encouraging women trailblazers day to day until female presidents, female board members, Lord Mayors and Prime Ministers are as unremarkable as women lawyers now are, as in numbers. You're all remarkable women lawyers. I think you know what I meant. At the current rate, gender equality in the highest positions of power will not be reached for another 130 years. That is completely unacceptable. So the momentum, the pace, the acceleration, the amplification, we all have a duty and a role to play in that. Tomorrow, I have the pleasure at speaking at a Women for Election event. I'm finishing here just about. This collective has partnered with the Victorian Government to encourage and equip more women across Victoria to consider running in the 2024 local government elections. Yes, you can be a local government councillor. The Municipal Association of Victoria has done some research and it shows that when women stand for council elections, they are just as likely as men to be elected. So it's not in the voting. However, women have been less likely to put their hand up to be elected. That's what we need to change. It's it in a nutshell in so many ways. The Vic Government is funding 60 fellowships. If you would like to know more information, you can ask me. You can look on the website, or you could come to the RACV Club tomorrow and join in the conversation. In closing, I believe that the Melbourne I represent wants a better city for women and for equality and equity more broadly. When I think about our priorities as a council, I want to embed the strategy that propels trailblazers like Flos, Vita and Lady Gladys. A city that says you are valued, you are respected, and you can make your wildest dreams come true right here in Melbourne. In fact, I want those to be wild dreams. Leadership is important. It's inspired by the stories that we've shared today. I urge all of you to use your platforms and your networks, your personal stories and your personal courage to push harder so that we can disrupt, we can create a new status quo that really serves all women fairly. Let's not forget that we're here today to honour Flos and her legacy in more ways than one. She opened doors for Australian women like you, like me, wanting to study law, wanting to practice law, and she did it right here in Melbourne at the Melbourne Law School. According to the Times Higher Education World University Rankings, Pip, you'll be so pleased I looked this up, this law school is still #1 in Australia and Matthew #5 in the world, so still lots of great work ahead. It's a place of powerful possibilities. Please, I'm encouraging all of you to be bold, to be radical and to make the most of your talents and your opportunities. It is wonderful to be here with you all. I'm looking forward to hearing your perspectives, answering any question that you have. I did want to really say thank you to Bianca Kwan. Thank you so much, and to Cornwalls for being the great stewards of the Flos Greig lecture over so many years. And now for handing it over to the Melbourne Law School to Professor Matthew Harding. Thank you for picking up this challenge with the spirit of Pip and for making this an inaugural lecture. I'm looking forward to listening to somebody else next year, but in the meantime, thank you for listening to me.
Formal thanks afterwards, Sally, but I can't wait to do them. I think that was an inspiring offering, and thank you. Questions? Anyone? Or while you're thinking...
It's always the hardest, the first bit.
I've got the first one, and then Jeannie can have the second one. You talked, Sally, about your family as an incubator of your pioneering spirit, your disruptive spirit also perhaps. Who else, what else has incubated the current Lord Mayor of Melbourne?
Oh wow, so many influences on my life. I was lucky to be at school. Flos and I went to the same school, Presbyterian Ladies College. We're claiming her anyway. And lucky to be there at a time when we had one of the leading educators, Joan Montgomery, who then really changed education in many ways and ended up on the Melbourne Boys Grammar School board as well as they sought change. But why do I mention Joan? Because she was such a go-getter. It felt limitless what was possible. And whilst there were barriers, she was one of those people that really, not physically, but was somebody that really kicked doors down. And whilst I did get punished for doing that in the girls' lavatories once, trying to set a record for how many girls could get into the one cubicle, her sense of joy at really the undiscovered, the potential, the possibilities is something that has stayed with me since then. And as I said, I do like taking risks and I really like change, but it's that sense of excitement about just having a go that Joan really instilled in me. The last thing I'll say, Pip, really quickly, is that I have had lots of influences in my life, and whilst not all of them have been formal mentors or formal coaches, I am a serial person for asking for advice, getting inputs, learning from other people. I'm always the person that harasses after a speech, or if I saw something that I liked, calling them up, and I recommend that because it's led to some amazing encounters.
And we do sometimes over-focus on formal mentorship when so much can be learnt incidentally. Over to you, Jeannie.
I'll try and manage the technology, which I teach technology law, which always is amusing for me. So my question is this. I think the numbers you mentioned, thank you for the wonderful speech and thank you to everybody here for contributing to today. But one of the numbers you mentioned is that women are entering and finishing law schools probably in a higher number than men. But if we look at women in the higher levels of the profession, so I'm joined by wonderful women here, but across the profession, women judges, women who are heads of law firms, women who are heads of businesses, they're very underrepresented. And going to the intersectionality problem, there's even less women in high positions who are not white women. How do we get higher up? Because that seems to be the challenge that we keep talking about. We're getting more women, but they're not getting to those top levels.
Exactly, and if it was one thing, that would be easy, wouldn't it? It's just so many things from top down and bottom up. Today I've really focused on encouraging women to take risks, put our hand up for more opportunities and really push through some of those ceilings and those barriers. But there's no doubt that whether consciously or unconsciously, so many biases still exist. And the unconscious ones are probably even more difficult to push through. It's why, you know, when I was a young lawyer and then a young business person, I floated the business that I started. And at that time on the ASX, firstly I became the first woman to complete a stockbroker licence by exam instead of by experience, if you like. It was one of my businesses. And then I became one of 5 women leading an ASX-listed company. It hasn't changed a lot since then. When I look back in those days, I was actually somebody that said, I don't think we need quotas. It's all on merit. With experience, I've become an absolute champion for quotas and targets and measuring things and managing and rewarding and carrots and sticks and all those sorts of things towards quotas, because it's been the only thing that I can see that has made a significant shift. And the way we've seen that is in the Victorian Parliament, where the Labor Party put quotas in place. We now have 14 female cabinet ministers, 9 men. We have 50% representation within the Labor Party. And to me, that's just a classic example of where quotas work. And what I've come to understand is that there are a plethora of people that have merit. So many women that have merit. It's not about merit because that is almost a given. There are so many talented, well-qualified women and men, of course. It's got to be more than that if we want to reach a goal. And so I think fundamentally, if we're going to make a shift, then we've got to embrace quotas. And then we can also look for those quotas across other areas of diversity. To me, that's where we'll see the most fundamental shift.
Thank you, Sally, for your wonderful and inspirational speech. Just following up from Jeannie there, do you think, yes, the question is how do we get there, but do you think we can offer more support services for women? Because from my knowledge, most women that do reach the higher positions don't have families, don't have children. It's just, I feel that we're being too many roles in the one person.
Absolutely. As I said, there's no one response here, because there are just so many issues, and some of them are very personal as well. But of course, support for women, childcare, for example. Yes. I think ultimately living in a society where we take equal responsibility for what happens at home vis-a-vis what happens in the workplace, all of these things have to fundamentally change, and their attitude and mindset changes, their behaviour changes, but there are also policy changes. I mean, one of the things I'm looking at and frankly a bit concerned about is that as we've embraced more flexible working as a result of COVID, that should be a good thing, because we've been talking about flexible working since I started work a long, long time ago, 4 decades ago basically. And now we've normalised remote working with the use of technology. We've enabled it. And it feels like something definitely that's here to stay. My concern is that it will become just a women approach to work rather than a women and men approach to work, and that we'll only see more and more women marginalised into, and I say marginalised, into remote working. We're choosing that for reasons to do with other responsibilities, but what do we miss out when we're not FTF in the workplace and other environments? So that's something we're monitoring very closely at the City of Melbourne with our own workforce as well, is to see what we can do to be part of that change, not just what happens in the workplace, but what happens at home.
I love that you're inviting and encouraging women into public office, Sally. I think one of the things that a lot of women might be fearful about is we're hearing about other women's experiences of the vitriol and online, trolls and things. What do you say to us who are afraid of that, and what's your experience at? How do you manage that?
It is brutal. I cannot gloss over that. And it can be very personal. And I think it really makes you stronger in so many ways if you can channel it in that way. I think it is one of the real issues about why people won't put themselves up, good people, because they don't want to deal with it, whether it's from media or anonymous members of the public or competitors. So there are a few things that I've learned to do because it comes like an avalanche at you and you could never properly prepare for it either. But it's completely worth it because, if anything, it drives my passion. It makes me feel... It requires me to have more courage about what I think is important, to be able to keep going in the face of all of that. It means that I work harder at making sure I've covered evidence, data, issues. I've thought more broadly. Mostly I take it as feedback. I look at it and say, people obviously feel passionate about this issue. They might feel differently to me, but nonetheless, it's important to listen and at least consider that in my own views and the things that we do going forward. I think there's a famous, it could even be Taylor Swift, who said, she loves people criticising her because it actually makes her more motivated to continue, and that's certainly what I've tried to do. I do listen to it. I do have a team that take away the really nasty stuff as well, so I don't see all of that, but I'm up earlier than them every morning anyway, so I like to get a little flavour because it does keep your feet on the ground and it does mean that you are seeing the extremes. But otherwise it completely emboldens me. And I think if they think that's going to stop me, then they've got something else coming. And I really do think that about the media as well. It's horrible.
Just as we take the microphone over here, and then we've got a question up there on the right, Sally, I've also heard you talk, particularly at the beginning of your first campaign, about the value and role of your family in your strength.
Absolutely, Pip. As I said in the speech, I am one of those really lucky people in that I grew up with parents that were just go-getters, no limits, completely supportive, encouraged us to make mistakes. I've grown up with that culture of really respecting failure and what it can teach you. They're often the best lessons. I see them as accelerators to better outcomes. And then I'm married to a person who is completely supportive and sharing of everything I do, has done that with the kids, has done that with duties at home. We often go to things separately so we can cover as many bases as possible and fulfil lots of responsibilities. And there's an absolute sense of team. And I think really that's what we've always worked hard. It hasn't always worked out brilliantly. I packed a case one night to go and get a red-eye flight from Perth to Sydney, and Andrew looked at me and said, "Where do you think you're going? Because I'm getting on a plane tomorrow morning at 5 a.m, and we'd stuffed up our schedule." So it doesn't always work out, but nonetheless working really hard at that, and I think it has lots of benefits across other elements, but I do feel lucky and grateful for that, Pip.
Thank you. My question relates to the new wave of women in politics and in the federal sphere, that these are largely independents and teals working outside the old institutions of political parties and have the risk of being splintered and isolated as a result. If women are not working their way through institutions, they can be marginalised more effectively. Your thoughts?
Well, pros and cons. I see and know a lot of women who've felt very isolated within the current party structure and processes as well. If you can't find your way into those parties, then putting your hand up, I'm an independent. Putting your hand up independently is another great way of doing it. It was one of the elements that was very daunting for me when I started in 2018, because I literally didn't even know what forms to fill in or who to talk to. Whereas if you're part of a party structure or an institution, then it comes with people around you to support you who have knowledge, already know the processes, have a lot of resources. I had to start fundraising from scratch and all those sorts of things. So it can be harder, but I didn't have to fight through pre-selections or seek party endorsement. I didn't have to endure some of the internal issues that happen in institutions either. So some of my friends who are in parties say that I took the easy way, but on the other hand, you're not part of a team either. Now, I'm a real team player, so this is an issue for me. And it's been quite interesting at Town Hall, because a lot of my efforts have gone into building a team amongst our councillor group, even though we come from so many different backgrounds. I've built up a team. We just launched it yesterday, M9, which is the 9 inner Melbourne councils, where we now work together on 6 priority areas. That's been another way of me building up a sense of team, even though we all come from completely different political backgrounds. So I think that there are ways in which you can build teams, even if you're not within what is an existing team. My concern about existing institutions, and I'll just comment on politics for a moment, is that the status quo is so powerful, and changing that status quo takes an immense effort, and I'm hoping that some of the independents will accelerate review of that status quo in long-held views within established political parties. That's a wish of mine, because you can't be Prime Minister if you're an independent, you can't be a Premier if you're independent. I'm lucky I can be Lord Mayor as an independent, but when you think of influence in those institutions, we need the party system to change.
Well, just a question. I'm hearing a lot about women, and I'm having a dabble in the not-for-profit sector. I've been involved in a women's club for some years that promotes women in a particular industry. The more I'm involved in the not-for-profit sector, the more I hear about, things that radicalise me more. But the question I wanted to ask arises from your last statement about the status quo and what's being done with men to change the status quo. Women, are out there. You've touched on diversity, not just gender, but diversity in general. What's being done to change the status quo, in your view?
Well, a lot, and I'm encouraged by that. There are programs like Male Champions for Change. There are programs at federal and state level that are led by men to look at diversity issues, which is fantastic. There are men in this room, which is great. But you're absolutely right. For us to accelerate change, we need to have men on board and really believing in the value of diversity. And I don't know why that would still be the case now, when there are so many studies to show that organisations that have at least equal representation or more representation of women usually make more money. The Australian GDP in itself has gained enormously from having more women in the workforce. So there are financial as well as social and values-based outcomes for having more women involved in our organisations. I think, to your point, we need more men to come on board if we're going to change the status quo. And I think we're seeing more stark examples of that in a more highly politicised world. But I would say that in my experience as a worker in large organisations, I've worked with ANZ, I've worked with KPMG, that what we really need is for men to use and live the policies that are put in place. So if men can take paternity leave, please take it. If men can work from home, please do. If men can do more of the duties with families, that would be awesome. And it's that sort of leadership just on a day-to-day level that I think would make an enormous difference. When I was at ANZ, I was on the diversity committee, and we did a survey, and surprisingly, we found that the most marginalised group within ANZ were men that had taken paternity leave because no one could understand them at the time. It's 15 years ago or so now, but in a very male-dominated environment, those men could not understand somebody taking paternity leave. So these are the sorts of changes that we need to see to change the status quo, I think.
Thanks, Sally. I just noticed no men have actually asked a question, so if there's extra question after this for a man, I mean, I'm Stella Long. I'm very lucky to serve previously on the Melbourne Law School Young Alumni Committee, currently on the Melbourne Law School Foundation Board. And I wanted to ask you for some practical wisdom, if that's okay. There are lots of needs in this world, and also lots of opportunities as well. And you've had a number of career changes, you've tried a lot of things, put your hand out there. Do you have any practical wisdom on how you knew where you are meant to be, and how you knew when it was time to move on?
Oh, wow, that's the holy grail of balancing our lives. I'll tell you, one, I take a very open, opportunistic approach to life generally, which means I get involved in lots of things, and I'm really aware if certain opportunities arise, I absolutely jump at them. And I won't bore you with some of those stories today, but I think that's really important. But the point you've hit on is absolutely key for so many people, is when do you stop doing something? And for me, I have very much trust the gut moments. If it comes to a point when I'm feeling guilty about a role I've got because I'm not spending enough time there, or I'm not adding enough value there, or frankly, I'm not getting enough value back because you need that symbiotic relationship to make it work, then I immediately respond to that. Put my hand up and say, I'm sorry, but I need to move on. I'm a really big believer in moving on at the top rather than riding that role or that opportunity down to the bottom again. And I also know that there'll be lots of other good people to come after me, and that every time I move on from something, the door opens for something else, which placates that sense of accomplishment and achievement that drives so many A-type personalities, and I can tell you're one. So I really think as soon as you start feeling that way, then find ways to move on and find something else. But saying no is really tough.
I'm going to use that as a segue to move from questions to thanks, Sally. And there are a range of thanks, if you'll bear with me briefly. I too wanted to thank Uncle Tony for his welcome to country. I wanted to restate the warmth and embrace that the Melbourne Law School felt from Cornwalls around the establishment of the Flos Greig lecture, and our indebtedness to Cornwalls for their support. So a particular thanks again to Sophie Filipponi and also to Bianca Kwan. There was a very exciting meeting 3 or 4 years ago, Sally, when we decided that pioneering spirit, and pioneering female spirit in particular, had a long-standing tradition at the Melbourne Law School. And thank you again to Cornwalls for supporting us in that, and to enabling future generations to recognise that they stand on the shoulders of the people that worked before them. I would also like to extend an extraordinarily warm welcome to the Flos Greig family, and thank you for being with us for the day and contributing your questions to Sally along the way. But Sally, it now falls to me to thank you. And I was reminded when I was reflecting on Flos Greig this morning that I think Sir John Madden in 1905 said at her admission ceremony that he was witnessing the graceful incoming of a revolution. And I thought it was a charming turn of phrase, and I thought, well, when we
elected our first female Lord Mayor, we too were paving the way for the graceful incoming of a revolution. And I do think that, as Sally has demonstrated today in her wonderful address, the inaugural address, she is a purposeful reformer. I do recall across the campaign the way in which you used data splendidly and to silence the critics, and I note that you alluded to the importance of being informed and data-driven in your purpose, but a purposeful reformer. As you'll all have seen today, a delightfully effervescent personality, and I think that's ever present wherever you go, Sally. But also, I think, and I use this word understanding the full irony, Sally, an infectious leader, but an infectious, offering an infection in the best of possible uses of that term. So thank you, Sally, for a simply wonderful address on behalf of us all.